The Mediterranean at daybreak. A thin mist crawls along the water, cold and heavy like a curtain being pulled down. Inside that haze, the drums are heard before anything is seen. Beat after beat, steady and decisive. Then the sound of oars striking the sea in unison, hundreds of strokes at once like a giant machine coming to life. Out of the mist, long, low galleys emerge. Masts stand thick as a forest, rigging crisscrossed like a spider web. Flags snap and flutter, appearing and vanishing as if the sea itself is breathing. On the opposite horizon, a second wall is moving in. This is not a fight of a few ships. It is two floods of wood, iron, and will, charging into a narrow corridor of water. The distance closes faster than anyone expects. The chant of the oars echoes back, collides with itself, and is torn apart by the wind. A volley from the bow guns flashes, fire flares like daylight lightning, and instantly smoke drops low dense, rolling over the sea like cloud pressed down onto the waves. Then comes the moment that cannot be avoided. The bows slam in, timber cracks, ropes screech, grappling hooks fly, bite, and drag two ships together like a lock on fate. On deck, no one can see far anymore. Only what is right beside them, masts shuddering, shields raised, silhouettes packed into smoke, and hands fighting for balance as the hull bucks under impact. Another shot. White smoke bursts out, curls back into the wind. The surface erupts with spray and shattered wood, then swallows it all beneath the mist again. And right then, between drum beats, wind, and grinding timber, a great banner lurches. Just a heartbeat. But in a battle where every eye depends on signals to know whether they are still in formation or lost in hell, one fallen flag can change the color of an entire front. This is Lepanto, 1571, the greatest galley battle in the Mediterranean. And the question is, who will be the one to make that banner truly go down so the whole sea tilts with it? To understand why that morning became the largest wall of oared warships the Mediterranean had ever seen, you have to step back. In that era, the Mediterranean was not just water, but a lifeline. Merchant ships carrying silk, spices, silver, and dispatches. Islands acting like floating watchposts. Ports serving as the gateways of power. Whoever controlled the sea lanes controlled money, influence, and more than anything, the right to decide who could pass and who must turn back. Years before Lepanto, scattered clashes smoldered like hidden sparks. Ships intercepted mid-route, cargo seized, coastal strongholds changing hands, and rumors spreading faster than the wind. Lose one voyage today, lose an entire corridor tomorrow. When tension reached its threshold, people no longer spoke through letters, they spoke through fleets. On one side stood the Holy League, imperfect but forced by history to stand in one line. Many forces, many ambitions, many styles of command, yet united by the knowledge that if they did not stop the slide now, the Mediterranean would slip from their grasp season by season. On the other side stood the Ottoman Empire, a naval machine accustomed to winning at sea, seasoned with galleys, confident in speed, oar discipline, and the ability to close distance and finish by locking hulls side to side. What made Lepanto terrifying was not only the number of ships, it was the rules of galley warfare, which turned the sea into a battleground at knife-close range. The galley was long and low, driven by oars. When the wind shifted or smoke blinded the view, oars still pulled the formation forward, still held the rhythm, still drove into the enemy like a wall that needed no runway. Each ship carried bow guns as an opening punch. Fire first to disrupt, to slow, then immediately close. And once contact was made, everything became a struggle of timber, ropes, hooks, and masts. You do not have to describe gore. Just the cracking wood and the screaming rigging is enough to understand a kind of war, where the line between staying afloat and going under can be as thin as a single missed stroke. That is why the greatest prize was not a chest of gold. The true treasure was control of the sea lanes, the ability to protect merchants, to hold ports and islands, and to keep fear from owning every season's wind. But to hold that treasure, they had to play by the rule that mattered most: formation. The two fleets would spread out like two vast carpets across the water. Whoever tore first would turn into isolated clusters, pinched, cut off, and trapped inside smoke and wind. Every commander knew it. So they brought not only oars and guns, but a way of reading the sea, holding rhythm, and sending signals through drumbeats and gusts. On the Holy League side, a strange card was placed where it could change the pace of the battle. Heavy, taller gun platforms, floating fortresses set ahead of the line. They did not rush into side-to-side grappling like galleys, but stood as a low wall, using firepower to slow the closing rush, break the enemy's rhythm, and most crucially, buy a few priceless breaths for the long line behind to keep its order. On the Ottoman side, the edge lay in speed, in maneuver by oars, in familiarity with close-range finishing. They believed that if they could drag the distance into arm's reach fast enough, the experience would speak loudest. So, in the last minutes of preparation, as the two walls became clearer through the haze, the sea felt like a countdown. Every drumbeat did not only keep the oars together, it kept the mind together, kept discipline together, kept the long line from drifting out of place. Flags rose high, signals flashed and vanished into smoke. Helmsmen stared at the point where the lines would collide, because they knew a small error here would amplify into catastrophe when hundreds of hulls met. And one cold truth remained. In this kind of war, once you were moving in, there was almost no turning back. Trying to swing around inside a dense formation was like cutting your own line in half. That is why Lepanto did not begin with cheering. It began with silence inside every ship, where everyone understood they were rowing into a bend of history. When the gap shrank to only a few thousand meters, powder smoke already tasted in the wind. The sea that had seemed endless suddenly narrowed into a corridor where every decision had to be made in a handful of drumbeats. And in that moment, the victory condition became as sharp as a cut on a map. Whoever kept formation in the smoke, whoever broke the other side's rhythm, whoever snapped the enemy center so morale fell like dominoes, that side would pull the whole battle toward itself, like pulling the Mediterranean to tilt in one direction. When the two walls of ships could see each other as clearly as a storm on approach, time suddenly shrank into drumbeats. The thump, thump, thump tightened, the oar rhythm quickened, and the entire surface seemed to tremble as if stirred by a giant hand. On every galley, blades drove down and lifted in perfect unison, leaving long white seams of foam like stitched lines. Hundreds of ships advanced together, and the Mediterranean's vastness collapsed into a single corridor. The wind carried the smell of smoke early. Before any hulls locked, people saw muzzle flash fire from bow guns, then heard the deep, blunt boom roll back like thunder hugging the water. White smoke columns burst out, curled low, pressed down onto the waves. Those first volleys alone were enough to turn the boundary between fleets into a shimmering blur, where signals could vanish in a blink. And then the rule of formation began to test them. The long line that looked unbreakable could tear like cloth with a knife if a few ships lost their stroke, if a current pushed a cluster diagonally, if a gap opened by accident, because on the sea, a gap grows fast. On one flank, galleys tried to slide outward to bend the enemy's side to pull them off the straight approach. It was a game of angles, forcing the other line to turn its bow a fraction wrong, so that when smoke thickened, they would lose bearings and peel away from the wall that protected them. On the other flank, ships strained to hold position. Command flags rose and fell, not for show, but to repeat one simple order. Do not chase the shouting. Do not drift from your slot. Do not let a gap open. In the middle, no one dared blink. The center was not only the collision point of timber and iron, but the collision point of morale. Ahead of the galleys, the floating fortresses spoke. They stood like a low barrier and fired in heavy, steady cycles, creating pauses and disruptions not for spectacle, but to do one life or death job. Slow the closing rush, fracture the forward rhythm, and force the attacker to reorder inside smoke and wind. Every blast jolted the air. The surface jumped with torn spray and white froth. Masts shivered, rigging screamed, and helmsmen fought to keep their ships from drifting because a single loss of control amid hundreds of bows was enough to trigger chaos. Yet even slowed, the galleys kept coming. Oars still pulled, drums still drove, and that was the terror of Lepanto. You could be delayed, you could be thrown off by one beat, but you could not stop the collision when the whole mass surged like a tide. Then came contact, faster than prayers. Bows struck, timber cracked like a door being forced. The impact rang dry and cold. Immediately hooks flew, ropes tightened, and two ships were locked like a clamp. At that instant, the battlefield changed shape, from a charge across water into a struggle on decks, from a wide panorama into a dense labyrinth. Smoke swallowed sight. People could no longer see the horizon, no longer count how many ships lay ahead. Only what was close, masts leaning, sails shrieking, rigging snapping in the wind, silhouettes pressed together in tight spaces, and voices colliding like echoes in a stone cave. On the flanks, the lines began to bend. Groups were tugged from the wall as if by an unseen hand. Some thought they were advancing, when they were actually sliding diagonally. Some tried to loop behind but lost the signal in smoke. And in galley war, being lost can be more dangerous than being beaten. Because lost means isolated, pinched, cut off from the wall of formation. The center now felt like a door. Both sides were shoving. Each side tried to keep its command banner standing and visible. The guns still boomed, but the decisive force was no longer the loudest blast. It was the movement of each cluster and a psychology that spread like fire in wind. When one ship lurched, the next saw it. When one signal lagged, doubt appeared, and in thick smoke, doubt cracks formation before hooks ever do. There were minutes when the whole sea seemed to freeze, not because ships stopped, but because everything was locked into one mass. Drums now did not only keep oars together, they kept people from panic. And then, a small sign appeared at the center. Not the biggest explosion, not the widest view, but something human. The command flag on a leading ship swayed harder than before, as if the wind shifted, as if the halyard was jerked, as if someone tried to hold it but could not. In a battle where everyone reads the flag to know where they belong, that moment was terrifying, like a crack across glass. Those closest saw it first. They held their breath, and the message moved faster than drums and wind. If that banner fell, if that symbol disappeared, what would happen to the long line, to morale, to the belief that they were winning? At that moment, the smoke thickened again. The sun dulled. The boundary vanished. Signals became fragmented, and Lepanto entered a new state where a small slip at the center could become a steep collapse on both wings. The narrator can speak softly, as if not to shatter the tension. Everything is driving toward a turning point, a moment when history does not change by hours, but by a few drum beats. And right there, amid grinding timber, screaming ropes, pounding surf, and smoke sealing the sky, the center began to tilt like the Mediterranean itself, waiting for one banner to drop, to decide who would pull this battle to their side. The instant the center began to tilt, the entire battlefield felt as if someone twisted an invisible lock. Clusters that had been welded together shifted from a hold and push struggle into a shove and break struggle, from maintaining the line into fighting for meters of water. Under the thick smoke, no one could see the whole front anymore. They only sensed the drums tightening, the oar chants breaking, and a strange silence slipping between sounds, as if everyone was holding their breath for one decisive sign. That sign arrived not as the biggest blast, but as a small moment. In the command sector, the banner of authority lurched hard, then dropped lower, lower, and vanished behind smoke and a forest of trembling mass. In galley warfare, a banner is not decoration. It is the compass of morale. The answer to am I still in formation, or have I fallen out of the world? When that symbol could no longer be seen clearly, hesitation rippled through ships nearest the center. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt how dangerous it was. One slowed stroke, one helm turned slightly off, one ship sliding diagonally out of line, and a gap would open. And a gap at sea can behave like a crack in a dam. On the other side, the moment was seized. Drums did not just drive oars. They drove the decision. This is when the remaining weight must be thrown into the center, when the opponent must be forced back by a single beat, because one beat backward here becomes 10 beats backward behind. Galleys pressed closer. Ropes went taut. Hooks held like iron teeth. Timber ground on timber with a dry, cold sound, like doors splitting in a storm. The floating fortresses continued firing in steady cycles. Each volley created a stutter, a shuffle, forcing ships trying to close to reorganize again and again. And inside those reorganizing beats, order began to slip away from anyone who could not keep discipline. The center now became a gate being pulled from both sides. The defenders were not holding only with strength, but with the belief that the long line behind them still existed. That belief wavered when signals faded. Smoke pressed low, wind carried tangled shouts, and inside that tangle, an invisible rumor was enough to make heads turn, enough to make one group hesitate, enough to make an entire section lose rhythm. On the wings, the angle fight turned ruthless in pure tactical terms. One side tried to slide outward to bend the enemy flank, as if rotating the whole wall. The other side fought not to be dragged into a spiral, because if the wing bent too far, the center would be exposed like a roof without a beam. Ships at the edge received constant signals. Flags rose and sank into smoke. Decisions had to be made in a handful of drum beats. Pour into the center to finish, or split force to save a section of the line that was being twisted. And here, war stopped being straight lines on a map. It became psychology jumping from ship to ship. When one cluster was pushed back, the next saw it. When a gap opened, the wind felt different through it. When the drumbeat of one section went out of sync, everyone heard it like a wrong note, and worry slid into motions, drilled 1,000 times. Then the domino effect began. Not a single collapse in 1 second, but the slow unraveling of order. One ship turned its bow to avoid a lock. The next had to dodge. The long line bent, and in thick smoke, a bent line is an invitation to be pinched, split, and pulled away from the center. Commanders understood that if the center broke, everything broke with it. So they drove what remained into the hottest point, trying to keep the command signal alive, trying to make the enemy believe the wall still stood. But the other side understood as well. They did not need to see the whole battlefield, only to feel the center sag, and they pushed harder, tighter, keeping drum rhythm like a key turning in history's door. In the haze, ships locked together formed slow drifting wooden islands. For minutes, the sea seemed frozen. Not because movement stopped, but because everything had been clamped, and force traveled from oars into hulls, from hulls into ropes, from ropes into will. And then, a second moment came clearer now. No longer a small sign. The symbol at the center changed, and those nearest saw it first. Then the message spread like fire in wind. The center had been snapped. You did not even have to declare who won yet. You only had to ask who still held the rhythm. When rhythm changed, the wings changed. The side gaining advantage began to press from the flank into a pincer shape. while the other side faced the cruel choice between holding the line so the whole battle would not collapse, or rushing to rescue clusters trapped in a labyrinth of timber and smoke. In galley warfare, every choice has a price. Hold the line and you may lose the chance to save your own. Rush to save, and you may open the hole the enemy needs. People often imagine a great battle ends with one final explosion. Lepanto ended differently. It ended with a shift in belief. When one side begins to believe it is pulling the battlefield toward itself, it tightens drumbeats, tightens the line, advances more as one. When the other side begins to believe it is losing the center, every sound becomes a warning. Every smoke bank becomes a trap, and the oar rhythm stops being the rhythm of victory and becomes the rhythm of surviving confusion. From that point, the balance fell hard. Gaps opened wider. Clusters were forced away from the hotspot, and the wall that once seemed unterrible cracked into pieces not from lack of ships, but from the loss of one shared beat that everyone could trust. When the sun climbed a little higher, smoke still covered the water, but the wind began to reveal the truth. The center had changed hands, and in galley warfare, losing the center means losing the battle. Lepanto, in a few short hours, turned the Mediterranean into a gigantic hinge. When that hinge tilted to one side, the whole door of sea power tilted with it. And before we step into the aftermath, hold this image. Amid smoke, drums, grinding timber, and screaming ropes, the symbol at the center vanished from view. From that moment, it was not only ships that changed direction, history itself began to turn with them. When the drumbeats thinned and the smoke began to lift, Lepanto left a sea that no longer looked like morning. Not because the water changed color, but because everything on its surface carried the marks of a collision on a massive scale. Splintered timber drifted, snapped ropes floated loose, torn sails rose and fell like lungs after suffocation. Ships that still held their rhythm quietly gathered into clusters, like survivors finding one another in a city after a storm. Far off, sunlight started to spill in, but it did not soften the scene. It only made the truth sharper. What happened here was not merely a clash, but a stress test of an entire age, where power at sea was measured by the ability to keep formation in smoke, to keep will when signals vanished, and to keep discipline when everything wanted to unravel. Commanders on both sides understood that the greatest treasure of Lepanto was not in a ship's hold. The real treasure was the sea lane itself, the trade corridors, the right to decide who could cross the Mediterranean in safety, and who would have to fear every season's wind. That is why Lepanto's meaning traveled beyond a single day. It became a marker, a check on momentum, in the story of control over this sea, a reminder that even fleets that seem unbeatable can be thrown off balance when the center breaks, when signals fade, when belief cracks at the decisive second. But Lepanto is not only a story of tactics, it is a story of human beings compressed into low holes, where drumbeats replace clocks, where haze and smoke replace horizons, where one slowed oar stroke can drag an entire line off its fate. And because this great galley battle pushed the era to its extreme, it also hinted at something else. The age of the oared warship reached its dramatic summit here, and after that summit, maritime history would gradually shift, making room for different ships, different methods, and different kinds of confrontation. If you're wondering how Lepanto reshaped the Mediterranean in the months and years that followed, who recovered fastest, who paid the highest cost, and why sea lanes remained, the quiet battlefield of power, don't leave the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because in the next episode we step into another hunt, where the treasure does not glitter inside a wooden chest, but hides inside a secret that can turn an entire fleet. And with one small error on a map, you'll watch history tilt again by a single drumbeat.